George H.W. Bush's post-presidential life, which was really interesting because he was quite a philanthropist.
Oh, nice.
So that's coming up. And then we have another one coming up about Notorious Missouri, written by the Irwins, who I think live in St. Charles. So we mostly have local authors, but then we've had the Bread Monk a couple times from PBS. He had a series on years ago about making bread, and a lot of people recognize his name. And he's done a couple of virtual things for us.
You said that he's called the Bread Monk?
The Bread
Monk, yeah.
Monk.
I gotta look him up. Bread Monk. I haven't heard of that. Okay, Bread Monk.
Yeah, St. Louis Bread Monk. Do a search on him, you'll find him. He's a lovely guy.
That's awesome. I love that, Bread Monk.
Bread Monk a couple times from PBS. I think he had a series on here.
There we go. Oops.
Oh.
All right, I just pulled this out. I'm putting it up on YouTube right now, so it's going to start displaying, so people will start finding us.
Okay.
We are live, so yeah, Bill, you want to give it a couple minutes here? And
yeah, I do want to. It's not quite 7 o'clock yet.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait another minute and see if for people to get on.
Do you need to take control of the screen, Lyndsey, at all?
No, I don't have any pictures or anything. So
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right. Yeah. So nothing needs to be tested. So we're good then.
Nope. All good.
Well, let's begin. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's author visit with St. Louis-born Lyndsey Ellis. This event is sponsored by the Friends of the Washington Public Library and Neighborhood Reads Bookstore, as well as the library itself. Bone Broth is Lyndsey's first book, and one that I found both educational and entertaining. If you want to be a part of the question and answer session following her presentation, you should be on Zoom. And if you just want to watch, then you should be on the YouTube channel. The presentation is also being recorded so that if you would want to watch it again, or we record it for people that aren't able to be with us this evening, it will be posted on the Washington Library website following tonight's program. So I'm going to turn the program over to Lyndsey right now and have her talk a little bit about her debut book.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Nelson, for help with everything. And just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining in just to hear the presentation. I really want to hear from you guys, just to see if you guys have any questions at the end or anything that you wanted me to go over specifically. But beforehand, I'll just give you just some information about me, my background. As was mentioned, this is my first novel. I'm from St. Louis, a native of St. Louis. And I went to Mizzou, or University of Missouri, Columbia, in Columbia, Missouri for my bachelor's in English. And then after that, I decided, okay, I want to try my hand at this writing thing. And I went to the Bay Area, California College of the Arts for my MFA in writing. Stayed out there for a little bit and kind of worked on this book. I've been working on this, oh my goodness, years. I'm ashamed to say, but I picked it up and I put it down, and just really took in a lot. And I came back to St. Louis in about 2018 and decided, you know what, I got to finish it and I got to get it out there. So I will say, while I was in the Bay Area, I found out a lot about St. Louis that I did not know. Ironically, it took me leaving to actually delve into a lot of the history that I don't think is as pronounced as it could be in St. Louis or in Missouri. And so, yeah, I did my research, a lot of what you'll find in the book. And I just took it from there. I said, well, I'm finding all this information out. And the way it came to me, because I noticed a lot of people, definitely in the Bay Area, they're very conscious there. And I felt like, well, where do we play? People in St. Louis, specifically communities of color, Black communities, where do we play in the history, that helps not only shape this state and this city, but, this country as well. And so that's really what got me to, it really inspired me to look into it more. And I found out a lot of stuff. And so it's basically been the backdrop of this book in a lot of ways. The book is basically about a widow, and she's also a funeral thief. She's a lot of things, but she's a widow, she's a funeral thief, and she's a former activist. So it's set around the time 2015. Her husband has just passed, and she's at a funeral of one of their friends. They all grew up together, and the backdrop is the Ferguson unrest. Like, this just happens to be after the time that Michael Brown was shot and killed. She's kind of guarded, and her 3 kids, who are grown, are around her. And it deals with a lot of, like, I guess, the social unrest that the city is going through, but also kind of how that weaves into their story, right? Just their story as a family. And so while she's grieving and she's going through these, these different changes in terms of where she fits in to all this and how she's going to live her life, her kids are finding out about her past as an activist. And basically, she was an activist in the 1970s during the whole social activism in St. Louis at that time, which was interesting to me because I hadn't known too much about it. And so that's what she's a part of. And you have to read it just to basically find out more along those lines. I will tell you that it has a lot to do with, I don't know if you guys have heard it in the news lately, but it happened to come up, which was a coincidence, but the veiled prophet, which is a tradition in St. Louis. And it started in the 1850s, around the 1850s, 1860s, after World War. It was a big decline here, economic decline in St. Louis. And the social elites of this time in St. Louis decided that they wanted to, have something to bring community together, their community. And that's what they did. And it was something to basically mimic what New Orleans had going on. For a lot of people that might not know, New Orleans is a sister city to St. Louis. So they were mimicking the tradition of Mardi Gras. And that's when they decided they were going to do the veiled prophet or whatnot. But the way it was set up, it was very exclusive at the time. And so it was only where, the social elites in that time, the big names, economic, white people, white families that had been there for a while, only they could really participate. So as the years went on, people started realizing that, and it was just like a bunch of social discrimination. People recognized the social discrimination, and they decided they wanted to do something about it, racial discrimination. So how that fits in with Justine is was a point in time, and you can look it up on your own. I won't try to go into it too much, but where each year they would basically have this set up where each year a different person was crowned the prophet of that particular parade. And this particular year, that when she becomes involved, she's part of a whole shakedown of trying to dethrone the prophet at the time. So that was basically her little part, you know, in the whole scheme of things, and her part of activism. She decides that it's not for her. Again, this is the 1970s, so you can imagine, as not only being, you know, racially discriminated against, she's also a woman, so she's got like a double sword against her. She decides it's not for her. She's gonna stick with, you know, being behind the scenes, raising a family, you know, just trying to, you know, do the everyday life thing, and doesn't mention it at all. Nobody knows about her past, but her, you know, her belated husband, and then her best friend, Bev, who's a huge part of the book. I will say the other part of the history there was that at the time I had them, they were living in Pruitt-Igoe, which was one of the biggest housing projects made in the United States around that time. That it was pretty big. And one of the biggest things that happened with that, was that it was demolished on national television that same year that they had the unveiling of the veiled prophet, which was 1972. So 1972 was a very climactic year for St. Louis. Just, you know, if you just remember that and you want to look it up later, it was just basically a chain of events that happened, and just, you know, really happened during that time of year. So this is what basically catapults her and inspires her to be part of, you know, the whole activism scene at the time, was that this was her home, and that it was raised at that time on national television. So yeah, that's the gist of where the, I guess the history plays into, the historical backdrop. And it's a lot of this is just, it's about that, but it's also about this one family, Justine being, you know, the protagonist, but just how she deals with her grief, how she deals with her identity crisis, and also her kids. They have their own stories. As you can see, it's kind of broken up into chapters where each character has their own story. And I tell it from different, you know, perspectives, so that you get not only her story, but, you know, the lives of her kids and what they're dealing with. And it's really just about everybody finding themselves, just, you know, everybody's wrapped up in some type of identity crisis and some type of grief. And it's basically about the systemic racism that we face as a whole, I guess, as a Black community, and how that translates into how we treat each other. So that's the basis, I would say, for this novel. And how we treat each other is like played out through this novel nonstop. So that's really where it's from. So I guess with that, I can read a piece of it, and then I would like to open it up to questions. If you guys had questions about that, anything that I said, or maybe that you wanted to know about it. I'll read a piece from Justine's part when so I'll say this: Bev, her best friend, is a hairdresser, and she does Justine's hair a lot. And this is the part, I guess, where she, you know, it's out about her and her secret past in terms of being involved in the activism scene during her youth. And she's deciding, you know, finally that it's something that she wants to own up to and, you know, try to move forward with in her own way. All you do is press down on the keys with your thumbs. Bev tapped the keypad with her shears, her sculpted nails brushing against Justine. As soon as Justine tried to peck the little buttons, letters from the alphabet flooded the search box. Random tabs popped open that she couldn't make disappear. No, heifer, like this. Bev dropped the shears in the sink and yanked the phone from Justine. She punched the pad with her thumbnails, her fingers expertly flitting across the screen. Okay. Justine snatched the phone back before Bev could see Rich's message. If she couldn't control who got a hold of her past, she figured the least she could do was still have some say over her current private life. Still can't believe how quiet you were at group yesterday, Bev said. Get off my back. I went, didn't I? Yeah, but the whole point is to talk. There's a reason we meet, you know. Well, you talked enough for both of us, Justine reminded her. Bev passed on her check-in speech just like Justine did, but for what she held inside during the group wellness discussion, she plenty made up for afterward during their drive home. Talking up the good food Justine missed out on and warning her how she'd end up like Myrtle if she kept refusing to be social with folks. By the time they pulled into Justine's driveway, she was ready to call it quits on their friendship, if just for a little while. Justine went back into the house with a dark cloud over her. Everything felt wrong, so she ended up doing what she did when she got that down. She read her Bible and smoked a joint, flipped right to some of her favorite passages and Psalms, and rolled up what little she found in Bev's glove compartment when they'd stopped to get gas. Then Justine listened to some Bill Withers while she took a bath and played dress up in clothes she hadn't worn in years, decades, stuff she couldn't believe still fit, with smells and textures that hurled old memories at her until she was nothing but a weak, teary mess on her bedroom floor. Justine realized that nothing she'd stolen from funerals, flowers, jewelry, handkerchiefs, could compare with what she rehashed that night. Crucial moments she tried to bury inside of herself or replace completely with other people's crucial moments came back full force. Just thinking about it put her on the verge of imploding. Cut it all off, Justine told Bev. She stared at her best friend through the mirror. Bev put her hand on her hip. Do what? You heard me. Why? Just do it. The shower head's drip seemed like it was getting louder. Muttering to herself, Bev disappeared and returned with a large towel. Thought you just wanted a quick, easy trim, she said, and hurled the cloth on the floor around Justine's feet. Took me 6 years to get your hair this long and healthy. Now you want to go do something stupid. You sound scared, Justine said. Bev knelt in front of her on the closed toilet, her slender palms hugging Justine's knees. Justine, I know these past few months have been rough for you. I mean, hair is just hair, but still. Her voice trailed off and her gaze too. Justine got the feeling she was being refused, bargained with. When Wesley died, she said to Bev, all the neighbors came by and they weren't just coming by to offer their condolences. The last thing I wanted was to be smothered in pity, but I found most of them just wanted to meddle, to see all what Wesley left me so they could try and take it. I wanted to tell them so bad, not a damn thing, but it was none of their business, so I didn't open my door for days. Not to you, not to the kids, not to anyone. No one belonged in this house but me and God. We were the only two I could handle or trust her. It was Justine's turn to trail off. She started thinking about things that had nothing to do with Wesley's death, like her kids who'd taken pains to better understand the person she was before any of them were alive or thought of. Things that happened so fast, Pruitt-Igoe's demolition in the spring of '72, the displacement of her family and closest friends. At the time, Ma was a wife and full-time mother and had spent nearly 2 decades working in produce at the same grocer. And she was made to leave the housing project she called home before it was destroyed, with only a suitcase and the urn filled with Pop's ashes. There was no way she or Justine could or cared to talk about it openly, even when Ma was finally given a new place to live, only 2 years before she died. What were they supposed to say to each other? Gee, remember when that happened? Justine couldn't let it go, not in the way Ma wanted her to. Ma dealt with it her way, as did Wesley and Bev. Justine dealt with it differently. She did what she thought was right at the time. Months after Pruitt-Igoe was destroyed, she joined others in the crusade to unmask and ultimately dethrone the veiled prophet for the sake of winning back the dignity and basic rights of herself and the people she loved. In that moment, she finally recognized how her part in the scheme, as small as it seemed, recovered so much humanity. But the plan backfired. They lost. Case closed. So Justine vowed to give up her days as an undercover freedom fighter. No more secret meetings with the group she forged a strong bond with while Wesley was away at work or tending to one of his affairs. No more nothing. Thinking back, Justine couldn't believe she'd stuck around and allowed Wesley to change the course of her path. But it happened. There was just the things people did or didn't do. Please, Bev, Justine said aloud, don't be one of those meddling folks. Do me this favor just once, simply because I asked. I just want the ends gone. The relaxed part. My roots can stay. Small puddles formed in Bev's eyes. She squeezed Justine's kneecaps. Then give me the damn scissors. I'll do it myself. The shears wound up in Justine's hands and then in her hair. Bev snatched them from her and began snipping until shiny black strands fell around Justine like black feathers. Justine looked at nothing as one hand gripped the other in her lap. When Bev was done, she rose before her legs could freeze and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her mind flashed unwanted snippets of a young woman with her memories of televised blasts turning vacated buildings, once her home, into mountains of gray powder on that fateful day in April '72. She saw the young woman on that cold December day of the same year in the Sears uniform she borrowed, hot and red and mad and wanting room to spread. She was theirs, instructed by her comrades to keep tabs on the dressing room behind the Kill Auditorium while she mended gowns of those debutantes, all hoping to be crowned and dance with the hooded figure, the veiled one. In the mirror, Bev stood behind Justine and sucked her teeth, hands on her hips. A mass of short, tough, uneven black hair sat like a halo around Justine's face. There she was, or the person she was once becoming. And I'll stop there. It's that chapter. That's my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody have any questions or have a question they'd like to ask Lyndsey?
Don't be shy.
Go ahead. Nelson, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit. On the back of the cover of the book, it says that you are passionate about exploring intergenerational struggles and Black resiliency in the Midwest. And when I see intergenerational struggles, I think of, intergenerational trauma, which is, kind of a growing field of study. And I just wondered, how much of a role that played in the writing of this book.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. A lot. I mean, that's one thing this book is. It's definitely intergenerational. You have Justine's, generation. I guess you would consider the baby boomer generation. Then you have her kids who are right at Gen X, and a mixture. I mean, you get a mixture, and I think that a lot of times what I wanted to see as a writer, I didn't see as much, intergenerational mixing, and how trauma develops and how trauma, just keeps spreading, throughout generations, because it's unresolved in a lot of ways, even if it's something that happened way back, which is kind of what I was, hoping to get at in this, is that, it doesn't go away unless you address it, unless it's dealt with.
Yeah, thank you. And in that respect, this novel did remind me of some authors, like John Irving or Richard Russo, who deal with intergenerational struggles of townships and families and people. And so I'm about 100 pages from the end still, but that's kind of reminded me of that, really enjoying it. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do find a lot of times we find out things about relatives that just blow our minds, don't we? Yeah.
Yes, totally. I've been getting a lot of people are like, well, what's like a funeral thief? Like, what is that?
That was one of my questions. Say a word about funeral thieves.
Oh my goodness. So I will say I don't know of any funeral thieves. Not that I know of. They keep it pretty secret. But I noticed when I was talking to a lot of women, especially a lot of Black women, my age or older, they would say, "Well, yeah, this kind of reminds me of my aunt or my great aunt, somebody in the family who." Goes to a lot of funerals, attends a lot of funerals, or like before the pandemic, mostly, of course. But where you would think of like, some people like weddings or receptions or something, it's like almost a social thing. Like I don't know what that's about, but apparently it was more relatable than I thought. So I'm not sure.
It seems like you address a lot of grief in the book too, grief of losing their home in Pruitt-Igoe, even though it was not a very pleasant place, I guess. And then the grief associated with Michael Brown's death, and just a lot of disillusionment, the grief that goes with disillusionment.
Yeah.
Was that in the back of your mind?
And that's another thing, a theme. I mean, I guess I didn't realize how, how when you're into it, so you don't really see it as much, as from people who are further removed. And that was a thing that came up for, people were saying that, they heard a lot of grief. One of my poet friends who I really, enjoy reading, he told me that like just reading this kind of helped him, deal with the grief of, a passing in his family, and I'm just like, wow, you never realize how your, writing comes off to other people. But yeah, that's a huge thing, I guess, throughout, is like this grieving of just this one family, and it runs parallel to the bigger, grief outside of that. Like you said, the displacement of a whole community, which I will say, and I should have mentioned it before, Pruitt-Igoe started out as integrated. Like it was whites and Blacks. And during, then you had white flight come along, as you did in so many cities, different cities all over the country. And that's part of a grief for Justine's children, because they're raised, in a struggling suburb, which was, is Florissant in this case. And they're dealing with the same thing, like a different flight. So this is like another intergenerational thing, or, different, a different generation's grief. But yeah, Pruitt-Igoe started off integrated, and then eventually white flight took place. And unfortunately, the upkeep of Pruitt-Igoe went down. And that's why eventually they decided to destroy it. So
I remember seeing it imploded on TV,
yeah.
Yeah. See.
Yeah, I saw, they've made documentaries on it and everything. It gets to me every time. I'm just, flabbergasted, for lack of a better word, to see that, it was just nationally televised. So, and that was another basis for writing, because you hear about that happening, and even in, the documentaries that I've seen. And my question in the back of my mind is, well, what happened to the residents? Like, we see this happening, we see a whole displacement of a whole community, but what happens to the people? What's their fate? And so that was kind of, one of the driving forces behind, writing this, is to humanize, the people that were there.
Yeah, there had to be thousands of people living in those buildings. And then,
Yes.
like you said, they had to go someplace.
Exactly.
Other questions from anybody?
Yeah, I saw a question in the chat.
Yeah, what does it say in the chat? Anybody? Nelson, are you able to read what's in the chat, Nelson?
Yes, I'm able to read it here. Let me pull it up. Were those people given assistance in finding new homes?
So as I was researching, I interviewed, a few people, and Apparently, I mean, there was in some cases, but as far as I know, widely there really wasn't enough assistance. So, and that's another thing. It's just it just lets you know how hard it probably was during those times, and just not only are people trying to find who they're connected with and find some in terms of their social group or their familial standing, but then you have to deal, of course, with the economic relief. So to answer your question, I mean, I guess there was some, but it definitely wasn't enough.
Did you come across the name Percy Green? He was a very important civil rights leader at that time.
Yes, yes. I actually interviewed him at the early stages of this book. And that was before I, even, that's when a lot of it was still being developed. And so I love just hearing about, if anybody can look him up, Percy Green, he's been a long time activist in St. Louis, from, just job discrimination, to, racial discrimination. He's been all over it. And I was just honored, that he was able to, that he wanted to open up and talk to me. That was just a blessing for me. I really look up to him.
Were you able to record those conversations? I would think that'd be an important historical oral history.
Yes. Unfortunately, I did not record his. And I also interviewed William Clay Sr. at the time, because he was part of he led the Jefferson Bank, that confrontation. And I was able to, and unfortunately, I did not record either one of those. But I definitely made sure I gave them, credit in the book, and, just thank them for just, being so open with me.
Other questions? I guess I would love to know how you came up with the title. I know in the book it talks about, cooking the bone broth, but how did you come up with that?
Yes, probably should have brought that up too earlier. So it's all about, I mean, and then if you look at the cover too, it's all about, you got this tree here, and it's all about really getting to the root of things. Bone broth, I don't know if everybody's tried it, but bone broth is, a great mixture, and it's normally known as a very good traditional comfort food in a lot of families, not just in the Midwest, but all over. And a lot of people use it as a healing, recipe. It could be a substitute for a lot of prescriptions. It's seen as very medicinal. So people use it, for flu, for colds, especially in the wintertime. Just sip on some bone broth, and as the elders say, you'd be doing just fine. So, so basically, this was a traditional recipe also in this book. And the reason why you have the trees is because one thing that the protagonist, Justine, would put in her bone broth was sassafras. And sassafras is a huge tree, it's a native, a lot of people grow them in Missouri. From what I hear, southern Missouri. I know they've probably got a few in the garden, Missouri Botanical Gardens here. But so sassafras, it's a huge thing here. I remember drinking it as a child, sassafras tea. You find it in it's got that root beerish taste because they have it in root beer, so that's one of the things. But what Justine would do was she would put the sassafras that she got from her neighbor. I don't know if you guys heard me mention Myrtle. She's the neighbor across the street from Justine, who's been there since before her and Wesley migrated to that location in the 70s. And so that neighbor had a garden, and she had, the sassafras trees, and that's every year Justine would go and get that sassafras, that root, and put it in her bone broth. So that's a twist in the book. I will say, I won't give it away, but I will say the one downside to the sassafras root or whatnot, if you use too much of it, it can be a bad thing, it could be poisonous. So you have to finish reading it to find out like the little twist in there. I'll just leave it at that.
Very nice tease. There was a brief little conversation that happens out in California where Auntie Kit says there's more to the South than farms and cattle, Sasha. And Lois corrects her and says, actually, Missouri is in the Midwest. My family moved here to the St. Louis area and watched about 10 years ago. And that was one of the first questions we asked people is, are we in the Midwest or the South? And everyone we asked gave a slightly nuanced, different answer. Where that line is drawn.
Yes.
And the novel is kind of, for me, filled with that kind of tension. Are we in the South or the Midwest here in the St. Louis area? Yes,
that's totally right. And I still ask myself that a lot. What is it? Is it Southern or is it Midwestern? And I think like you said, depending on who you ask, you might get a different answer. I think my mom said it best when I used to talk to her about it. She said now I can't, of course I'm not going to remember how to say it correctly. Geographically, it's considered the Midwest, but the people are Southern. And so I think to me, that was the best way that I would be able to describe it. And a lot of that's historical. You have the Dred Scott case and, Missouri was a slave state and, a lot of different things to take into account that would, really qualify Missouri to be a Southern state, but it is geographically speaking in the Midwest. So that was a great point. Thank you for bringing that up because I get that a lot here. I get it everywhere. People are like, well, yeah, is Missouri or St. Louis, is that really Midwest? It seems Southern.
That might explain some of the tension that we have in our legislature, that we don't know where we belong.
True.
I don't know.
That's a great point. And that brings up the whole question of identity, right? It's just like, well, who, even regardless of community or color, it's just like, where do we fit in, as a people, as a state or as residents? So a lot of times we just don't know. We're always like straddling something. We're straddling a fence on something.
In the little biography on the back of your book, it calls you a cultural worker. Can you describe? I was a sociology major, and so that term kind of was curious to me, a cultural worker.
Yeah, I worked in especially when I was in the Bay Area, I worked in a lot of nonprofit and I worked in a lot of, different issues in terms of racial justice, restorative justice, mental health advocacy. And so I kind of, and then a lot of times when I was working in those fields, we would talk about how we could use the arts as a, medium for restorative justice, how that plays out in, healing, like healing therapy, arts therapy, if you will. And so I kind of just, thought one umbrella term for that is cultural worker. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, anybody have any questions? You have anything else that you would like to say other than buy my book?
Well, yes, buy the book if you can. It's also in the libraries and I don't know, just keep reading, just buy the books that are meaningful to you, not just mine, but there's a lot of meaningful stuff out there. I'm looking at your, the background, all your books in the back and, I love, just books, as long as we can read and share, what we read, to me, that's very important. That's priceless, it's definitely priceless. So I'm all about that.
I lead a book club and we're going to use your book as the book of the month for September. So we'll
thank you.
be studying it a little bit further.
Thank you. Yeah, let me know if any other questions come out of that. And thank you guys for all the great questions. So some stuff that I might have left out at the beginning of the presentation. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for doing this for us, and thank you for everybody watching, and we'll do this again sometime, maybe when you get your second book finished.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. Bye.